You cannot stop a company from laying you off. Here in the United States, almost all contracts are at will. Literally any day of the week they want to fire you, they fire you. Like there's no safety net, as you mentioned. So the real thesis of my book at the end is building as entrepreneurship is your own income streams, is what can you control is a piece of this. So if you want to hop back on the job market, networking, personal branding, LinkedIn estimates that after COVID layoffs, 70% of people found their next job based on intros, based on who they knew. That does not surprise me. It's great to have that data, but it's really, you ping your friend Tim, you ping your friend Lisa. Those are the people who are actually going to help you get the job, not just spamming 400 CVs somewhere.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Tarin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Good morning, everyone. Today we talk to someone on the intersection of technology and social innovation. She started her journey deeply immersed in academia to highlight biases in speech recognition datasets, quickly becoming a recognized voice in tech circles. With a lack of diversity in tech glaringly apparent, she wasn't content to sit back. She launched Women in Voice from her parents' basement, thank you, Mom and Dad, which exploded globally, turning her into a voice for change in the AI space. When she's not busy architecting the next big AI product or mingling in founder communities, she might be spotted running with her dog or possibly adding another language to her impressive linguistic repertoire. But right now, she's spilling with me the tea. Welcome to the Product Tea, Dr. Joan Palmiter Bajorek. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
How much on a scale of 1 to 10 did I butcher your name? Because I did not ask you how to pronounce it.
I would say a solid 7. My name has never been butchered before. I don't know what you're talking about. First time ever.
Can you pronounce your name for the audience in case I did it wrong?
Yeah, my name is Joan Palmiter Bajorek. Usually before I get on stages, I give people like a palm and budge, if that helps them as a linguist trying to map on words. But I really couldn't care less, truly.
I am so glad for that. Well, can you introduce or add anything that I forgot about your very colorful CV that I did not know how to summarize clearly? Can you add anything to this in case someone does not know you?
That was a beautiful introduction. I think the only things that my team, working on, I have a podcast and I have a book coming out. So in addition to the technical build stuff and the community stuff that I'm doing, my socials blew up last year with the AI stuff. As someone who builds this stuff, like 160%, like ridiculous. And people wanted the practical content. So my team and I looked and we're like, okay, we're going to launch a podcast. I was able to get a book deal. And so your AI roadmap was born.
My AI roadmap, it feels like you did it for me, you know?
But yes, I mean, it's meant to be very B2C. It's meant to be quite personal.
No, that's really good. And we're going to talk about it. But what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
Gosh, you gave this question to me beforehand and I've been thinking through it. I was immediately, one of the first thoughts I thought about is like people try to figure out where to position me. Like I went on a hike with some friends and this woman was just trying to suss out like, who is this chick? And we were walking. I was like, yeah, I build AI stuff. I work with data sets, blah, blah. And I happened to be an influencer. And she looked at me like I was lying. And she just is like, you look like any other brunette. Like I had just like my regular day makeup on or whatever. But I think people assume, or they're trying to like, how technical is she? Like, is she actually an influencer? What's up with, I guess, how much makeup one wears denotes how cool an influencer or how many people you influence? I don't know. But I think trying to figure out kind of where I sit, which ironically to your introduction of me is like, what is Joan up to these days? Like this portfolio career of many projects that light me up and make sense to me internally. I think people are figuring out where on my path I am.
Yeah, it's always funny when you're like in these circles that are maybe not directly from tech or like they're from a different kind of part of tech or like your parents or whatever. And you kind of have to explain and you notice how you struggle with like, how can I say this in a way that it's not completely confusing, but also not completely wrong, like in their ears.
People want you in a box.
Yeah, exactly. If they hear AI anyways, then you're going to be the person in the household that is going to fix the phones.
I do. I am the tech help for my family.
That's exactly what it is. Well, from one influencer to another influencer, welcome to the podcast.
Woo!
So that was the last positive note on this podcast because we're going to talk about something today that is quite interesting. You're talking about this from one angle, and I'm talking about it from another angle, as we have found out already, which is, I think you called it layoff anxiety, the fear for losing your job. I don't know whether we have a more specific definition of this term, like whether this needs to be in a specific time frame, like the fear of losing your job in the next 30 days or whatever. I also think there's a cultural component to this because in the US, you have almost no labor protections. In Europe, you do. But at the same time, you said something interesting in that the majority of people have or suffer from layoff anxiety. Can you add a little bit of flavor to this? What you mean with that? And why does this matter in the first place if we always had it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was a relatively new term to me, although I had experienced it. Layoff anxiety is something that Harvard Business Review has been tracking, especially related to COVID. I think was the first kind of like here in the United States during 2020, mass layoffs just hit so many companies and people. But as AI automation is also tracking this like another hype cycle across it, we see in the news literally almost daily thousands of people were cut at this company, thousands of people were cut at Boeing, Intuit, companies that are thought to be stable. So I think there's this, I don't know if it's omnipresent, but underlying anxiety for many, many people I know. But yeah, that study quoted that 50% of Americans are experiencing layoff anxiety. And I was like, here in Seattle, it feels like 80. I don't know who isn't experiencing that anxiety.
Yeah, and we talked about this in the pre-talk a little bit, and I just got to also say it now on the podcast itself. I think that I agree with you a lot, or I agree with the Harvard Business Review in that sense. I also have a feeling that it is more. I also do think that this is driven by this really, I don't want to say it's weird, but like fascinating fact that probably the majority of people are suffering in some kind of way from imposter syndrome. So I mean, like really beyond of like, hey, what do other people think about me? Curiosity, right? Really like an imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. Why is everybody having their shit together? I don't know what to do. I don't deserve this job. I hope I don't lose this job. And it leads to this really weird kind of cycle of like not good things in yourself, in how you present yourself, how you work for others. And then you just, you're just being depressed somewhere, but then on the screen or like in front of others, then you are forced to smile. It feels very dystopian to me, in some ways.
Literally, as climate change comes for us. I mean, it really, I work to be hopeful, but I don't think it's going to get better from here.
Well, okay, good. So on a more positive thing, yay, fine. Okay, so layoff anxiety, at least for me, myself, as well, like if I think back in my career, the majority of my career I also spent in tech, in, your typical kind of office job, where you go to the office at 9 and then you need to apologize if you step out for 15 minutes doing something else. And then you clock in and then you go out in the evening, maybe at 6, 7, whatever this is. And I do remember all the way back since I started and had my first job that I was also like ridden with this layoff anxiety, like constantly thinking and looking for signs of like, oh my God, like especially when you make a mistake. And the effect for me was that I developed also a very unhealthy, not just because of the job, but like a very unhealthy obsession with pretending that everything is under control. Leah knows everything. Leah does not need any help. Everything is great, which then unfortunately became a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense of, and then I was actually performing bad because I did not grow in these jobs. What we're talking about right now in today's context, though, is something that is really an outside influence. And when we talk about AI, and AI has been around for decades, right? We're really talking about this machine learning technology jump. We talk about language models and all this kind of value that tech companies are right now surfacing with AI, deep learning, whatever it is, that is really taking over formerly human labor jobs. That's what we are talking about as well a little bit, right? Like this is where this is going, correct?
That's correct. Well, and it's even a little bit weirder for me as I build conversational bots that may automate jobs. And having been in 2 AI layoffs myself, or like there's something very metacognitive that's going on in the zeitgeist. Yeah.
So this is the thing that I always find very interesting. So like, because if you look at this from the perspective of, let's take SDRs and BDRs. So people who do outreach to other people. We've been teaching on the net each other how to imitate personal closeness. We're developing tools. For instance, I could look up on Joan whether her dog's name is Kenny, right? And then I'm going to include it in an email. So she's going to look at it, right? And then she's going to buy my enterprise solution for $50,000 because I open it with like, hey, how's Kenny doing? It's such a great dog, So we've been always trying to kind of like put effort into like faking this closeness into things. And now with AI, we have models that are really, really good in imitating humans even more. But the bad news is like we don't need the human anymore on top of it, right? To do a lot of these things. So it gets to a point where I'm feeling like I actually appreciate it when someone does not fake this closeness anymore and just tell me what they're about. And I feel like, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this, but like, I know you're passionate about language. I'm also very passionate about language from a different angle, I think. But I do think that the effect is always, also with deepfakes or like AI being indistinguishable, like you also don't know in a year or two whether this is me actually sitting here talking and I'm just like somewhere taking a bath in the room next to whatever, you just don't know. But how does this all play together? Like where is this going and where does this leave to human? I think this is a thing where you have a lot of thoughts about, right?
I do. Well, and you brought up so many topics. I'm trying to figure out which thread to pursue. But I think back are related to your what is humanness? What have we been taught to be more human, especially in sales cycles? I know a head of sales that I adore him because he is so direct. I know his motive. He wants to make a huge amount of money for his family. Underlying whatever he does, that's what like his beating heart is. And I just appreciate when I know someone's motives. Maybe it's a weird thing to say, but I've met so many people with so many different undercurrents of what's actually going on for them that sometimes I find it can be hard to read in different volatile situations. But I think related to the deep fakes, digital twins, like I've seen more and more. There was like a viral interview where someone was interviewing someone and they weren't sure it was a real person. The way the screen was glitching, they thought they might be talking to like a deep fake in and of itself for the interview that they were recording, and then they bounced it. Or I think this, as you mentioned, kind of that dystopian, like, are we talking to humans? And will bots just talk to bots eventually? Like, where is the human? Is the human needed? I believe we need a human in the loop, but that kind of what conversation is in those systems.
Yeah. It is interesting where this entire thing is going to, but coming back to the initial fear that this is going to create anxiety for being laid off, and layoff is a different word for like losing your livelihood or not being that useful as well, like on top of it. Like, let's just say the salary is not the only thing that you're doing and like why you would go for a job. How do we fight this? Do we do something about it, or do we just like try to understand and say like, yep, that's what's going to happen, so buckle up?
Yeah, my book really focuses on agency. It's what can you do? You cannot stop a company from laying you off. Here in the United States, almost all contracts are at will. Literally any day of the week, they want to fire you, they fire you. Like there's no safety net, as you mentioned. So the real thesis of my book at the end is building as entrepreneurship is your own income streams, is what can you control is a piece of this. So if you want to hop back on the job market, networking, personal branding, LinkedIn estimates that after COVID layoffs, 70% of people found their next job based on intros, based on who they knew. That does not surprise me. It's great to have that data, but like, it's really, you ping your friend Tim, you ping your friend Lisa. Those are the people who are actually going to help you get the job, not just spamming 400 CVs somewhere.
That's a very interesting one. So we call this in the German language, we call this vitamin B. B stands for Beziehungen, which is like relationships. And it does sound a little bit unfair to people who are just applying to jobs otherwise. But I do think this goes exactly to this point. Why is this happening? If you look at it from the different perspective, me as a hiring manager, when I give tips on how to optimize your CV, like what should you write about, what should you do, and so forth, there's still a lot that you can suggest that people do wrong and so forth, but the overall quality of the form of the CVs has drastically improved. Why did it improve? Because ChatGPT is there and everybody's using it, of course, or Gemini or whatever. And this leads to this really weird effect that now it's getting harder for the employer as well to find a good match for the job that they are looking for, right? And that furthermore then creates an effect that even if you do pay attention to this, you will get hires of people who are probably not good fits because, in the worst case, they lie about something because it's about their livelihood. They need to have a job and so forth. It's kind of like this devil's wheel. It kind of perpetuates itself, And this is what I find so interesting. But that's why I think this is a reaction again to, I cannot trust this anymore. So I need to go back to the things that I can trust, which is either an experience with a product or like a candidate that I had already. So like someone would, hey, do you want to have this job? Or I'm going to go and ask my friends, hey, Joan, do you know someone that would be good for this position?
Mm-hmm.
And because what that means is if you give me a good recommendation, it means I do not have to go through 500 to 600 CVs, do dozens of interviews, conversations, this eternal fight about homeworks and so forth. And that is really, really hard to kind of deny, right, as an upside.
Yes. Well, and I think even your estimation of 500 resumes, I talked to someone the other day, 2,000 resumes for one role. It's overwhelming. And you're right. Like, do you even know these people? Like, if you get a referral, you're like, oh, great. Like, I've heard in the dashboards that like referrals, there's a top section in the dashboard for the hiring manager. Like, these are the ones that are starred, they got referrals. Like, visually,
Yeah.
you're going to see those first, you're going to prioritize those first. But who gets those networking opportunities? Who knows the people who work at those companies? There's this inequity that's like built into what we're talking about, but it's simply the way the world works, at least over here.
You know, and I think there's an interesting thing because you said also like if you understand people's motives, I
Yeah.
always talk about this in terms of incentives.
Mm.
So like if you understand someone's incentive, which is kind of like the same thing, I would say, then you really have a deeper understanding on like why specific things happen. So why should I recommend a friend of mine to a company? Now that's an interesting one because it's not just like, oh, hey, it would be cool, you know, like if we could work together. It also means that I'm putting now my name a little bit, you know, in the line for a recommendation, which is good for my employer because, you know, oh, okay, so she has some skin in the game, you know, like she's not going to recommend someone that is just going to come on the first day into the office and just like steal office supplies. I'm sorry, this is like, it's cool. I mean, I'm going off the rails again, but you know what I mean, right? Like there is an incentive system in this recommendation that is positive, like it's a win-win situation. Whereas you could argue if you apply for a job as a stranger completely and there's no connection between the employer and this person, then you have this thing where it's not necessarily a win-win situation because you can absolutely win something as a candidate by kind of, you know, getting into a way that is not the correct way. Because exactly as you said, there's no protections as well from afterwards, right? Like as a worker. Okay, so how do we approach this then? You said optionality. Let's dive into this because I'm a big fan of this as well. Let's just start with the evergreens, right? So like the things that probably always work, and then maybe we can move on to something that is more specific or whatever you want to go with. Like aside from networking, or maybe also networking, whatever you want to go with. Like what are the first steps that you need to do when you feel like, hey, you know what, I should actually take care of this before I get laid off, or like that it doesn't hurt that much if it would happen.
Right. And so the concept is like, okay, I feel this anxiety. What am I actually going to do about it? Like just sitting
Yeah.
in that neuro seat, I don't think is going to help you. Networking is, I think, exceptionally crucial to this. I don't know if you've heard the study about the strength of weak ties from the 70s. There was a professor who philosophized, I forget his name, it's in my book. He philosophized that it's not about your closest connections, your best friends already have shared the best opportunities. It's the strength of weak ties, like the people who you barely know. Like Elizabeth knows this other person, and that person is the person who could help you for that huge opportunity that helps you level up. Strength of weak ties. There was a study done very recently, I think across 5 years of LinkedIn data, 2 billion data points that they actually reinforced it and found that it was absolutely the case that people outside your closest, strongest network that helped you. They actually call it the paradoxical strength of weak ties. So I think the networking piece, the personal branding, like, do you even have a LinkedIn? Do people outside your company even know you? I know some really high performers, they barely even have a network outside of their team at their day job. So if you think that you're going to lose that team, speaking of that identity piece, I've been a VP at this company. I've had so much in this one egg, one nest. If you know no one outside of that, you really could be in a disadvantaged position. So I think having those options, going to those events here in Seattle, you've really no excuse. There are events every night to literally, in human terms, walk out and meet people.
So if you would have told me that about a couple of years ago, I would have probably cringed quite a lot, like for myself, because I'm an introvert and I don't like to just go to events to get to know people. I always go for, like, if I do go somewhere, then it's always for the content, and not for the people itself. So for me, this definitely would not have worked. However, I mean, I think the way that networking has worked out for me is absolutely undeniable. I would not be here without the help of other people as well. There's a lot of strong women that stand behind me that have helped me, not just like with advice, but also like opportunities where like, hey, why don't you try to just talk to this particular person in there for no gain whatsoever backwards as well.
Mm.
And I think there's a very interesting shift before you kind of get into this, because I sometimes see this again with people who are a little bit more junior, in that hopefully I'm getting this now out of my mouth because I find it an interesting thought. It's like when you talk to someone, you get sometimes this feeling that they do not want to share anything in value, or, I don't know, data, for instance, like how does it work for you on LinkedIn and so forth. Like almost it's like a sacred kind of knowledge and so forth, unless you give them something first. So it's a very transactional kind of thing. Like, hey, you give me something first, then we can talk about it, especially if they do not know you very well. So maybe this like secondary connection that you were talking about, right? Like, so that these weak links. And I have learned from some of my best friends that, first of all, no one cares what your secret strategies are. Just be open, just share everything. Just, in a really crazy way. Like when someone asks me like, hey, how's it going with the Substack? I show them the numbers. I'm just like, hey, look, this is how it is, right? Like I also write about this. I'm not because I'm authentic. It's just that, hey, here's how this actually works. Here are the goods, here are the positives. This generates trust extremely fast. And a lot of them are like, hey, I'm so glad you're sharing this with me. This blows my mind. And I did not expect that you would share any of this with me and so forth. And I think that is kind of the difference, because in order to build a good network, you need to give first. That's how I'm looking at it in some way before you can. I don't want to say expect something back, because it's not like, oh, if I give something to Jo and she also needs to give me something back. You need to be almost like indiscriminate in giving, in some ways. I don't know whether you have thoughts on this, but like this is definitely how I experience it with people.
I experience it this way as well. I'm not a very religious person, but maybe spiritual. This concept of karma, I certainly believe that I pay it forward and I pay it back. Some people have helped me in amazing ways that it was nothing for them to make that intro. And it was some of the biggest opportunities of my life. And so I think, as you mentioned, this indiscriminate, I don't know if I can indiscriminate for all the DMs I think you and I both get. But if I can, like I make intros many times a week of, as long as it is the right fit. And I believe so, like, what does it hurt me to send an email? Like really, truly. And it could be huge for them. So I believe in paying it forward and paying it back.
Yeah, I think in my case, it's also that, I still try to also qualify my pipeline. Let's put it that way, right? So like if it's too B2C, or like if it's too much out of my wheelhouse, then, probably not going to sit together with that person and talk with them and so forth. But other than that, I don't go into meetings anymore to sell myself. I think that was also one of the bigger kind of unlocks. I always try to like, hey, even if we do not get together, you have something valuable to take away. And I know at some point, one of these conversations will bear fruit. Maybe, maybe not. But in my experience, it has. And then developing this kind of trust that this is the case is very difficult at the start. Because as you said, like everything is, like you have this one job. And this is the other thing, right? Like you usually have one job. Like, okay, I'm talking now with someone from the United States. It's not true for everyone, but most of the time people have like this one main job. And there's such a clump risk. Yeah, there's just, oh, if I lose this job, then I need another one. And I need it immediately because my savings are going to run out. And I think the beauty of having optionality means is that you're getting better at your job because you're not afraid of losing it. You're starting to speak truth to power as well. You have a plan, right? Like in case something starts to fall through and so forth. And I think that's where optionality really can kind of pay off, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Well, and most people, at least statistically, do not have an emergency fund. So as you mentioned, they jumped off one ship or they were kicked off and they have to find another one ASAP, or they go into debt. That's literally, these are the options on the table. And as you mentioned with optionality, I think people maybe, I don't know if I want to say closed-minded, or just like they live in a world of a 9 to 5. A full-time job is the only option. Like increasing your income streams is absolutely a possibility. The concept of side hustles, whether that's you have to have one to pay your bills, multiple jobs, or there's an option to become a content creator. Like there's a donut business I keep talking about near my house. She's making hand over fist selling gourmet donuts. Okay, like there's a line around the block every day for her freaking gourmet donuts. Like, does it have to be SaaS? Does it have to be tech? Like contractors here in Seattle can make so much money because no one is a contractor and everyone works in tech, and they're willing to pay whatever dollar sign to get their kitchen remodeled and their, front stairs redone. So I think thinking outside the box and thinking about different income streams are like big call to action, like expand your mind, things I might recommend to folks.
So if I'm approaching this from like standard market theory, how you would understand like how markets move and how they behave and so forth, then I would say right now we have, specifically with product managers, by the way, like I think they're some of the most affected ones with the layoffs. You're landing in a situation where you compete against a lot of peers that have the same on paper.
Yes.
There's some very talented peers as well on paper that are probably a better fit than you are for most of the jobs that you're applying for. So I would not say that kitchen remodeling is probably the best idea in that case, but I get your point, right? Like I also don't want to make it sound too trivial. It is very difficult to kind of wrap your head around this. But my advice to people is always to never stay in one lane, like always try to connect two lanes with each other. So for instance, I had a board game shop that I was connecting with my knowledge as a product manager, right? It's not something that I can switch off. It's not like, like, oh, now I'm going into the board management, into the board games things. So I'm completely forgetting everything about funnels, user behavior, and engagement with people and so forth. No, but I tried to connect it and that kind of worked as well. And I think sometimes you have to really leave the industry. It's exactly as you said, and take what you have and kind of try to figure out, like, are there other jobs that have maybe also different names sometimes? Mm-hmm. Or fields where you're just like, hey, if you would look at this like a product manager, you would win so much out of this. So for instance, a very good one is project managers in classical hardware offline businesses. You can learn a lot from these people, but you also can teach them quite a lot as a product manager. How to organize teams, like things that are just very natural to us are very impressive to a lot of these people when you say like, oh, like I was just like leading a team of 10 people. And they're like, what? You did what? And it's like, yeah, but that's what we do, like as a day job. Mm-hmm. I think that's how you differentiate yourself. You try to take it and you go somewhere else and then dig your heels into this. But yeah, okay. So do you have any practical advice other than like, hey, like let's build optionality and like, let's say we get started. Let's say we're building out the network and let's say we are, we have some people and so forth, but we still need to think about our positioning, right? So like, what can I offer? Who am I going to be in this market? Am I just doing it for the money? Do I need to follow my passion? Not everything is monetizable. So where do I take it from that point?
I mean, people's goals are very personal. I don't think I could make a pan recommendation to anyone consuming my content as far as like, this will make you happy. But the second part so it's your AI roadmap, actions to expand your career, money, and joy. And I really fought for that joy word because I know a lot of people who in theory have the career, have the money, and they're not happy. And so really thinking of back to the goals of, and it may happen that you got the things you said you wanted, and then you're stuck in that and you're like, wait a minute, for whatever reason, I'm miserable. And knowing that you can make pivots, but really understanding what joy means for you. I have a friend who literally just has a 9-to-5. He can close his laptop at the end of the day and he is done. And he's not paid as much as the other people I know. He is so flipping happy. It's ridiculous. So I think just being in touch with yourself to understand what that happiness and joy and purpose and goal is may take time and may be iterative, but that's what I'd recommend.
So I think, yes, 100%. There's another reason behind this. I do not think that you can be good at anything that you do not have any passion for. Now, you can fake it, of course, for a specific time, but I don't think you can be actually good for it. And here's the reason. If we go into a weird metaphor about poker playing, the good poker players in this world are measured on what they do with a bad hand. It's not about winning the stuff that is easy to win, right? Like it's always like, so what do you do when it gets rough? When it gets like, you have a shitty hand, the table is shitty, everything is shitty. Like, what are you doing with this, right? So like, how do you win on this? And if you think about this as well, like as a content creator or like as this dirty word influencer, I always cringe when I say it, but like, it's just, I guess that's what we are. If you're an influencer and you have to create content and so forth, it's not about the days where things are great, like where you have a lot of energy and so forth. It's going to be around down the road, like a year later where you start to get traction, maybe 2 years, whatever. How do you get up for yourself when you're not feeling like it? When you have a really shit day, things don't work out that well anymore. Like the market is moving somewhere else, or like, life is creative, like it making you miserable. That's when it matters on how you can actually sit down and still work for it. And that's going to be driven by your passion. And in any market, the person that is leading or like that is getting ahead somewhere is that person that does more than the average. And the average, hopefully, does not have the same passion as you. And that's why I'm thinking that without passion, you can just not stand out. You don't need to be the best one at anything. I get that, but some jobs are just boring, right? Then you can just like muscle through them. But I had so many conversations with people who just said like, oh, I'm going to go to Google for 2 years and then I'm going to see what I can do with my life. And I'm just like, why? Like this, exactly it's not going to end up like that. You're going to be there in 5 years because you're just like, now you're too much in love with the money. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's true. And I know people who unfortunately box themselves into a life, especially with mortgages, where they, in theory, have to have that dollar sign to maintain that life. And then like 8 years down the road, they're like, wait, what did I do? What choice did I make?
This is such an interesting point that you just made. I saw a documentary a couple of years ago about, I think it was a Japanese couple. There seems to be, some situations where they live in extremely small apartments on purpose. They save a lot of money so they can afford an expensive car. And so the car is extremely expensive, in relation to their living standards and everything and so forth. And I was watching this with a friend and they said like, so stupid. Why would you do that? Right. And I'm just like, hey, you just took up a mortgage for a house. It looks really nice, like and all that. But like, you're exactly on the hook like this person as well. It's just like on a different kind of item. And like reducing these expectations to yourself, like in these standards, I think is at the heart of what you just mentioned.
It's true. And I don't want to be rude to the Japanese couple. Cars are depreciating assets. And houses are, in theory, are appreciating assets. But I think knowing what you're willing to sacrifice for is a great exercise for anybody.
Well, if I learned anything, then that we spend a lot of time and energy into social status. I'm no stranger of that. And I would like to go back to one point that you said exactly on this topic. So you said you were talking about a roadmap, right? So like, how do you create your roadmap? So a couple of years ago, I created my roadmap on Miro. I had in the middle, I had like Leia's getting shit done, right? Like it's like that was the middle of it. And then, I had post-its coming out with arrows on like, where does this lead? Then at the end, there was the shittiest goal that you could have. It was just like, hey, I'm going to be a CPO at a very specific company and I want to get there. So what do I need to do to get there? Mm-hmm. And this was not about the pay. This was about social status. Like, oh my God, look, I have the title, I have this natural drive to be a show off because of my insecurities and all that, the imposter syndrome. It's like, what do I need to do to prove myself that I'm worthy? So let's assume the goal is not that crap. How do you suggest to kind of build out this roadmap? So you've mentioned already, like, we have a specific passion that we should go for. What if you don't know what you're enjoying, maybe? I don't know. I'm just trying to throw down a couple of curveballs.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it sounds like you and I've almost always known what's on the horizon for me. I've just loved languages and it's paid out well for me. I know people, I recommend prototyping. I recommend trying out little things instead of being like, you know what, I'm going to jump into product land or I'm going to become a machine learning expert. Like, try going to a meetup, try building something. Like, I think testing the waters and checking in with yourself is one of the things that people, because we're scared to fail, I think don't even give ourselves that exploration, daydreaming opportunity before like a $14,000 boot camp investment that we like are setting the tracks of what that needs to be. But I love what you mentioned about like long-term thinking and kind of back propagating that goal of, if I want this big monumental thing, what do I need to do to get myself there? If I've decided this is really the truth of what I want to do, some of the biggest goals take years. So I think that small testing and long-term thinking.
This is funny because I actually approached this a little bit different. Not that I say like, what do I need to do in order to get there? I think I've put up post-its on like, what is keeping me from it? It was like, seriously, like, honestly, I'm just looking at the Miro board right now. I have it in front of me. And it's basically saying like, the first steps is like, okay, there's two major things that could keep me from getting some, like whatever this shitty goal is. One of them was my health is not playing ball. I had some indications, like that I would have some problems and so forth, but, I wasn't sure like how bad it's going to get. And then the other one was like, the market is going to go to shit. Well, was I not absolutely prophetic in this. It did not help at
Can
all.
you do my reading next?
No, seriously, I should make a video about this. This is very interesting. But then there was really more on the practical side. So at the time I was at Small PDF, I was in a very specific role as a principal, and I said like, okay, so my path to being this particular person, like, is there a stepping stone that I can take in the situation that I am right now? How does it look like? How likely is it? Is there something or someone else in line where I cannot go across? Or is there another step that I can do from the outside? And, and then I started to develop this tree, and I had multiple ways to my outcome, if you wanted to call it this way. One of them was to apply directly for CPO roles, or one of the other one was, let's get a director role first for 2 years, like kind of breaking it down and then doing this. And it was very interesting because this is also how I actually create business cases nowadays, where I just try to mark, how likely is this now to be a big blocker? Is this huge? Is this surmountable or not? And so forth. So I feel like that also kind of helps sometimes.
Well, and I love that in the hurdle. I'm like looking for pavers and like stepping stones, and you're like, okay, what hurdles are going to be next in my marathon? No, but I think it can be a super direct line where you apply and you're like, oh, wow, they accepted me for a CPO position. Whoa. Or, I'm really going to need to prove myself. What does that CV need to look like to be ready at that moment when someone makes that decision?
Yeah, that is true. But the ultimate, like the pursuit of happiness, I'm pretty sure there's a book that's called like that.
I think there's a movie too, perhaps. Wait, but did you get the CPO position? Did you get what was on your post-it?
Oh, yeah. No. In the meantime, yeah, but only after I did not want to have it anymore. Like the goal was crap, but it was very helpful because it moved me somewhat into the right direction.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I went beyond this in terms of, the career that I have right now. But I think the point was, it was a helpful thing to kind of lay out a roadmap, but not in a sense that, for me, I think it's about thinking about the different possibilities and knowing that if you have 4 main avenues to get to whatever you want to achieve, financial independence can also be something, like I want to retire when I'm 45 or 55, whatever, that that, okay, if this one does not pan out, then, I'm going to try the other thing. And then I'm going to try the other thing. And personally, I don't have a recipe for this, but I think to be relentless, just be stubborn. You can cry on the way. It's totally fine, but you're going to be stubborn about it is the thing. Because if it was easy, then, everybody would have done it anyways beforehand.
Yep. It's that concept of grit. It's so popular here. Like being resilient across many years and many hurdles. Well, I even think like the basics of just following up. I was talking to someone the other day and they're like, I want this, I want that. I was like, cool, send me an email. Like, I need you to send me these things. Didn't even send the email. Like I would have like basic little things. I think people drop the balls.
That's interesting. What do you mean? Like with following up, like with taking your help?
Yes. Well, like, going to networking events. And if someone says, oh, I'd be willing to make you that intro, or like, I can send you that resource, and you don't.
Oh God, you know what? I struggle with this. Yeah, no, this is true. Yeah.
I remember early in my career, I would send emails and people like, wow, you actually followed up. And I was like, you think I went to that conference, spent all that time and money, and I have this goal, and you can help me unlock that goal, and I wouldn't send the email? But sadly, this is exactly what happens on a daily basis. And I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, like you've mentioned, or neuroses, or they literally just forget. But if it's tied to a huge goal, I don't know where that unlock piece is, but it's confusing to me. Send the email, follow up.
Yeah, and make it easy. So maybe more a practical tip, like make it easy to be looked into, right? So like this goes to your tip of like, hey, like please have a LinkedIn profile that represents you a little bit.
Yes.
Not like a keyword aggregation thing that is good for search engines. And then the other thing as well, like if you do start to talk to people, please give a Calendly. Never send emails like, hey, when would you have time? Just send the bloody link, please. I hate this. Like whenever I see someone like, does it work for you at 9:00 in the morning? And then I'm like, in which time zone do you live? It really drives me crazy. There's tools for that, right? So like think a little bit about how your future self would handle this in that regard.
But that is a skill set. I mean, that in and of itself, what we're talking about is a skill set. Where do you learn that? We don't learn that in school here. I mean, that's literally, I had a manager who was like fastidious and exactly what you're talking about, like email efficiency. She would like revise. We wrote fancy emails for provosts. I was her assistant. And like she would revise them 15 times to make these crisp, beautiful emails. And they got amazing response rates. It was bonkers.
So maybe if she's out of a job, she can start as an SDR, like
She is extremely well paid and does not need to be working, frankly. But that skill set I learned from her. And at the time, I was like, this is neurotic. And now I so deeply appreciate.
No, I do as well. Like always try to think like also if you do follow-ups, right? Like don't always include information that you could already give beforehand. So for instance, hey, Joan, let's meet. I include my link or I make a suggestion as well. Like, so you basically can say like yes or no. You can still suggest something else like, hey, I don't want to do that or whatever. But like in case there is, you can just like say yes. Just make it easy to people.
I was going to make a joke. This is literally conversational design, like my field of creating bots and like getting a yes, no answer, or like how you feed the information to them to surface it at the end of the email thread. That is a job. Conversational design, like conversational products for AI bots. We try to make the best conversations.
Yeah, no. I think it's very underappreciated, right? It's like if you make it easy for people to interact with you, you drastically improve the chance. Like, I mean, there's so many opportunities you just fell through because it's just hard to get in touch with some people. I have some high performers that just choose not to be on Slack. They do not have WhatsApp because of security concerns and so forth. And I'm empathetic to that. I kind of understand. But like, if I always have to talk to you over email, I'm sorry, you make it a little bit harder. Okay, that's not very specific. But the person that I'm talking about probably knows when they're listening to this.
Steve, you just called out.
His name is not Steve. But yeah, okay. So you're talking a lot about AI, right? So like also like your podcast name is, I'm not sure whether you've mentioned actually, it's Humans of AI.
Your AI roadmap.
What? Excuse me.
But actually, Humans of AI is a podcast I was featured on recently. So
No, you had an interview on this one. Exactly. So because you're rooted also in AI, apologies. So when we talk about AI, everybody's talking about AI. How do you think about this specifically when we talk about optionality and like really understanding like, hey, what is there? And you're completely new to this. You have an inkling that, AI is something that may be interesting me. I know a lot of women who grew up without a computer, at least in my age, like they were not very technical and so forth. Like, I mean, they know how to use Office, like the stereotypical kind of document management stuff and so forth. But how do you approach this? Like, if you want to just like get into this entire topic of AI, what makes like, how much should you learn as someone in any case, maybe to just like understand what is going on and why maybe this also gives so much anxiety because you do not understand what is actually going on. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
I do. It's so funny. We keep talking about anxiety, right? Because like, can I keep up? Am I too late? I've been asked that question. Am I too late to even be in this field or jump in? From a college student, even. I think I really believe that understanding the practical fundamentals of GPUs, of data, of machine learning are going to serve regardless of what the next 2 years look like. So I really recommend people to do that. And then be curious, stay like your knowledge cannot, or I'd recommend it doesn't fossilize in 2024 of where we are today. Like continuing to be curious. I love going to tutorials and seeing how other people approach the usage of different tools, practical examples. I mean, my podcast, literally, I interview people who are building. I've been really annoyed of all these people on stages like AI, the future. And I'm like, if you're not building it, I don't know if I want to hear from you because it's so hard to actually build things out. So I get people in my sphere on my podcast talking about what they're actually building and their career, how they actually got there. It's just like super practical and concrete.
This is so amazingly true. This is even more true also at scale. I want to just like make a little bow around this. It's not just the technology itself, right? So like what are the limitations and so forth, and like what are the capabilities? Where does it work? Where does it fail as well? There's just some very, 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 very big limitations on this. But even if you just think about how do you structure a small company, a very, very small company, to do something with AI, assuming you want to train your own model, like nothing crazy, just like like some basic stuff. Even if because right now the performance that we have in the market, you can do quite a lot of good stuff with the open source things that are available. It's just talking to a friend about this as well, like today, like just the fact that in AI, so many things are happening at the moment. And there are research papers coming out all the time. And you're probably, most of us are not reading those because we're not that deep into the tech. That's more like for the AI researchers. You do not know how much this adds to anything. It could be that something that you're building right now, when it comes out in 2 months, is already out of date. And this is something that happened to us at Jua all the time, right? Like we were starting to build something like cutting edge in week 1, and in week 4, outdated, old, slow. You have to rebuild the entire thing again. And at the same time, you have research that is just like, it looks very simple. And after 6 months, it's still not there. Like it's like the entire structure is completely different than a classical product. QA is different. The separation from input bias, like how do we prepare data? How do we do QA and so forth? All of this is wildly different. Now, you don't need to understand all of this, but it helped me quite a lot to just like see like how the standard model on how we think about stuff, how we produce a product, design, programmer, ship, kind of done, does not work in AI products. It just doesn't. And that alone is already quite helpful. And I love your point of like build something yourself, even if it's just a private project. Let's see whether you can build something where you can go through the store and say like, hey, can you tell me what's missing in my fridge? Even if you just feed it like some basic data on like what is, in a text file that it just then outputs and so forth. Like there's so many problems already in this task that gives a lot of appreciation. But is there a specific, maybe an artifact or a course or anything that you know about, like that you would send to someone where you said like, like, hey, I'm just getting started. Like, where should I begin? Like Andreessen's Horowitz list of like 150 articles that he's putting somewhere, or like.
I really like the work of Andrew Nguyen, or I think that's how you pronounce his last name, NG, over at, I think it's Deep Learning AI. He does there's free courses and paid courses. I think right now I see people over-indexing for the machine learning data stuff, and I'd really love to see people on the more hardware. Like there's a podcast episode that just came out about edge technology, and I'm listening to how the size of a quarter, what you can run on, is just wild. Or maybe that's a thread on this one is like, everyone is going in this direction, consider this one. Like really being thoughtful about, but I think having those fundamentals is really, really key. So a balance of that.
Yeah, but how do you learn it? Like it's the same kind of question about back in the days, it was like, oh, you need to learn SQL. And I always had my kind of standard websites where I'm like, okay, here's how you can learn it. Like there's a good course that I think is really good. Nowadays, I'm not sure whether you have to anymore because language models are really good at it. So I'm a little bit divided and so forth, but like learning about hardware, architecture of a system. What is a GPU? What is a bus? What is a CPU? What is RAM and so forth?
Yes.
That is out of the wheelhouse for most people. And I really don't know how to teach this. I was fortunate that I built my own computers and I wrecked them.
And to that point, like I saw this research that blew my mind from Pew Research Center that last year, 60 to 70% of Americans had heard of ChatGPT. Do you want to guess how many had tried ChatGPT?
I have no idea.
14% of Americans had tried ChatGPT, not, used an OpenAI API. I'm not talking about that. I'm literally saying just had opened like the console.
Yeah.
And so we're in the echo chamber.
We live in such a bubble. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I have a kind of like a side passion in VR. So I've been with VR since the inception. And VR is one of those things that is getting a pass in the category of you have to unfortunately experience it. I cannot explain it to you how this feels. You need to just like put the headset on and then you kind of see how it is. And with these language models, I feel like it is the same a little bit because people still talk to it when you just put them in front of it like it's a machine, right? So it's like a search engine, like, so, hey, ask it anything. Like, hey, like where the best restaurant is in the next 50 kilometers. Then they type restaurant 50 kilometers. No. Talk to it, like form a sentence. And then they have spelling mistakes. Like, no, keep it in. Like it's such a technological advance. It's such a leap in technology that people really are just, they cannot comprehend it. But I also do think that this has also led into this weird catch-up game that we're now playing with people's conceptual of what is possible and what is happening right now, like with propaganda, false information, and all of this kind of stuff that is definitely also propagated by AI models because they can spread it much, much faster and so forth. And yeah, but I feel like I'm drifting again. It's like it's turning into a philosophical episode. I'm so sorry.
No, I like it. I think addressing those out loud as we see changes. The example I would give that blew my mind, speaking to the people who aren't trying it. I was at a holiday party and someone was trying to understand my work. And I was like, oh, no sweat. I'll pull up ChatGPT on my phone. And he tried to use it, this uncle of mine. And he just like kind of freaked out and was like, okay, I'm done. Like that. But people experience it differently who don't even understand the fact that it could respond back.
No.
Or like even what type of data can I speak into it? Do I have to have perfect, grammar? Like I think people joke about like, is prompt engineering a skill? I believe today it still is a piece of good inputs to get good outputs.
Yeah, I think so too. And like maybe my last advice on this is as well, like if you've never played with a custom GPT, so like something that is remembering some data that you gave it. So for instance, I don't know, a cookbook that you have from, I don't know, or like a PDF or like some structured data. I think that's where people really understand the value of something like this, because ChatGPT doesn't know obviously what you have on your table or like what is going on in your life and so forth. But if you start to feed it data and then build on this, hey, do you remember last week when we did this and that? That's where you see it really start to shine. And that's giving you a lot of appreciation as well.
Context and personalization. I agree.
100%. Okay, Joan, I'm sorry. We've been going for 5 hours already. And we need to come to an end because I was a bit late and I promised you that I'd give you your...
I need a bio break, Leah.
So do you want people to contact you? And if so, where should they do it?
Yes. People can contact me. I'm on LinkedIn. My name is very unusual, so go find me. I strongly recommend, though, before you do that, to check out my podcast and book, as that is wild amount of information. And maybe as we're talking about this, what do you actually want to talk about? Or what of my work or conversations and content I put out there really speaks to you? Is definitely a message I'd be far more interested in getting than just like, oh, you're an influencer, let's connect. I get those daily. So differentiate yourself if people want to reach out.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. Thank you so much for coming. I think this was a wonderful conversation, and I hope it was not the last time. Thank you so much for coming, Joan.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.